Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Heather. Let's get to our top story tonight. China's Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi has said that U.S. policy on China needs to return to objectivity and rationality. He was speaking to the U.S.-China Business Council through video link. According to a transcript published on the Chinese Foreign Ministry website, Wang Yi said, and I quote, "We should strive to restart the dialogue, get back to the right track, and rebuild mutual trust in the next phase of Sino-U.S. relations," unquote. He blamed the growing divisions between the U.S. and China on some Americans with outdated Cold War mentality and ideological prejudices, as he put it. He also said, and I once again quote, "The key is to respect each other, respect each other's historical and cultural heritage, respect each other's core interests and major concerns, and respect each other's choices." Relations between China and the U.S. have steadily deteriorated during outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump's 4-year tenure, but 2020 has been particularly bad, with the Trump administration almost routinely sanctioning Chinese individuals, groups, businesses, and companies. In fact, Wang's speech comes as the Trump administration continues to push a series of punitive measures against the Chinese government. In its latest move on Monday, the U.S. State Department announced new sanctions against 14 officials on China's top legislature, the National People's Congress Standing Committee, over a national security law imposed on the financial hub of Hong Kong. Equally, Wang's speech signals Beijing's expectation that it could do business with the incoming Biden administration. To discuss this further, we are joined by Dr. Sharon Austin, Professor of Political Science at the University of Florida, and Kerstin Brolsma, business analyst for China Market Research Group. Thank you to both my panelists. Before I get to Professor Austin here, there were 5 points that Wang Yi talked about. One was, as I said in my opening, correcting strategic perceptions. The second was strengthening communication and dialogue. And he said that China and the U.S. should start dialogue at all levels and talk about whatever they want. His third point was expanding mutually beneficial cooperation. And in that, he talked about major global challenges like, environment, COVID-19, and the rest. And his fourth point was managing disputes and conflicts. And since the social systems and the governmental systems vary, so therefore there was a need for mutual respect. And finally, his fifth point was improving the public opinion towards each other. And that is something where he wants a lot of contact at multiple levels, businesses, think tanks, local governments, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get to Professor Austin here. Now, Professor Austin, as I said, it seems like Wang Yi is, actually through Wang Yi, Beijing is signaling that perhaps it could do business with the incoming Biden administration, and it's not going to be a figure of speech, someone who's going to be a bull in a china shop, as President Donald Trump's administration was. What is your reading of his speech?
Reading of it is that I think he's absolutely right. Joe Biden is going to be much easier to deal with, but that's not to say that Joe Biden is soft, because he's not. He's been in politics for many, many years in the U.S. Senate. He's worked with American presidents. He served as vice president. Now he'll be president of the United States. But I think that his style of leadership is different from that of President Trump. I think with Joe Biden, he's more of a consensus builder. He's someone who believes more in collaboration and coalitions and working with people and compromise. But President Trump is totally the opposite. He doesn't believe in compromise. And during these final days that he'll be in office until Joe Biden takes over on January 20th, I think not only with his foreign policy, but also with his domestic policy, he's going to pretty much have the same kind of unyielding position. He's not one that believes in compromise, because that's just his leadership style. And I think that the officials there know that.
So, it's interesting that President Trump was not really interested in issues of human rights and the rest of it. Notwithstanding what they've been doing with reference to Hong Kong and elsewhere and the rhetoric. But by and large, if we look at his approach, for instance, in relation to Israeli illegal settlements, in relation to, other things happening in the Middle East, wasn't particularly interested in that. Now, President-elect Biden has a record of, call it being a liberal internationalist or call it being neoliberal, Wilsonian, whatever term we might want to use it. So there's going to be a focus on some of those areas which Wang has identified as the differences in the social and governmental systems. Do you think that Joe Biden would understand that? And, as Wang Yi suggested, that both sides should respect each other's choices, or is he going to use his neoliberal approach with reference to what he would consider as, important questions regarding human rights and other alleged excesses of the Chinese internal political policies?
I think he definitely is more concerned with human rights. And I think that with Joe Biden, he was elected by a number of American progressives, people who are very liberal and who strongly support human rights issues around the nation. And so I think that with that, Joe Biden is going to have to address human rights issues because the people who put him in office are pretty much going to demand that. And I think, as I said, his leadership style is going to be completely different. He is going to not necessarily want to interfere in the relations of other countries, but nevertheless, he is a person who believes in supporting human rights. And when he thinks it's necessary, he's going to do whatever he thinks is necessary to try to make things better for people in other countries.
Right.
So I think they're dealing with a totally different type of president, and I think we all know that.
Could you specify some of those areas where you think cooperation would be possible? You said that Biden is not going to be soft, and I completely agree with that. But at the same time, you mentioned that he's a consensus builder. So are there areas that you can identify for our viewers where you think cooperation is likely to at least improve relations to a point that it does not impact the broad spectrum of U.S.-China relations?
Well, I think the number one issue where there's going to be more cooperation is with the coronavirus, because the one thing that I think of as an American citizen when I hear anything about China and when I hear anything about President Trump, I think about the fact that President Trump refers to the coronavirus as the China virus. Yeah. And so that in itself is offensive. And several people have asked him, why do you refer to it like that? It's a racial slur. People find it very offensive, but nevertheless, he continually does it. So COVID-19 is an issue that has affected our country and affected the entire world. And so you'll definitely see more cooperation among nations, and among the U.S. and China and other nations as well, as far as trying to combat that issue. But also economic issues are also very important because the coronavirus has devastated the economies of every nation practically. And in America, it's devastated the economy, but not as badly as we thought it would. But nevertheless, there's going to be more cooperation in terms of other countries all working together so that they can try to address economic issues as well. So with coronavirus, also just healthcare generally, I think you're going to see a lot of collaboration on those things as well. So I think that now in America, there's a lot of optimism. But not by everyone, because everyone didn't want Joe Biden to win. But I think there's a lot of optimism that Joe Biden will have a much better relationship with the leaders of foreign countries simply because of his experience and also because of his leadership style and his personality.
Right. Stay with me, Professor Austin. Let me pull in Ms. Brolsma here. Ms. Brolsma, you work for the China Market Research Group. You obviously are looking at how the situation is unfolding. Now, one of the things that some of the analysts on my program, analysts from the United States, have been talking about, actually two things. One, that there is a bipartisan consensus on China. And secondly, it will be very difficult for President-elect Biden to come in and pretend as if Trump's 4 years did not happen. Now, would you agree with this assessment? And if you do, what would be your reading of this?
Yes, I would absolutely say that, currently in the U.S. there's bipartisan support against China. The U.S. currently is very anti-China on a number of issues, trade tariffs, the greater economy at large. I think, the largest person, breaking social barriers right now is Mike Pompeo, and he is just using his last 2 months in the Trump administration to, break every norm that he can. But in addition to the executive branch of the U.S., there's wide support in the U.S. Congress and House of Representatives to increase investigation into China's human rights abuses or into China's origins around the coronavirus. And so I think these kind of issues are things that have wide bipartisan support in China. And so then, in the United States. And so starting January 20th with President-elect Biden's inauguration, I think he will hear from both Democrats and Republicans that China is something that he must focus on and must have a much more hardline stance than he may have as a member of the Obama administration.
Pompeo has often been accused of taking ideological positions. And I think one can perhaps mount an argument partly in favor of that. But Pompeo is outgoing, and President Joe Biden will have his own team. And the sense is that while he is going to be tough on China in certain ways, there are other areas where he would like to cooperate with China. As a matter of fact, the Chinese analysts are quite confident that unlike President Trump and his team, President-elect Biden is likely to, or let me put it like this, that they think that he is someone that you can talk to, someone that you can do business with. Do you think that is a sense which is, borne out by what you hear? And you're based in Shanghai. You obviously, as the business analyst for China Market Research Group, come across the sentiment in China. So what would you say to that?
Yes, I think absolutely. There's a growing sense of optimism that, a standard diplomacy that has been lost over the last 4 years will return under the Biden administration. But there's also a feeling that Pompeo and Trump, they're using these last 2 months of their administration to essentially box the Biden administration in to a certain very, very hardline stance on China. And so that any policy that the Biden administration may have that is very different from the Trump administration on China, it's going to take quite a while for them to change gears, to change tactics. I think there are some people on the ground here in China who almost wanted a second term for Trump because he was so, wild and so, tweeting or what have you at any hour of the night, that it was much easier to kind of push the U.S. off as this other. But I think that under a Biden administration, Biden will be much more diplomatic, use his years and years in Congress to reach out to European allies and to create a block of allies that can then discuss with China on a number of controversial issues. And so I think there's a shift in how, local Chinese people are viewing how China and the U.S. and then how the U.S. and China with U.S.'s allies at the table as well. How is that conversation going to shift as potential new members of the conversation are added after January 20th?
Right. Let me go back to Professor Austin. Professor Austin, there's one approach, which was the Trumpian approach. The other approach could be, for President-elect Biden to look for areas that we talked about, areas of cooperation. And then also, and which is something that he's talked about, for instance, in his Foreign Affairs article in the March-April issue, where he talked about getting together with the U.S. allies and presenting a certain kind of front to China. And by doing that, so to find areas of cooperation, which means that some of the toxicity will get out of the relationship, and then secondly, to have a consensus across other state actors to somehow try and influence China's behavior on issues that are of concern to his administration. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that you used the phrase about people having a sense of relief that now that they're not going to have to deal with this quote-unquote bull, because President Trump has been called a bully in America. And I think that people are going to be relieved because at least Joe Biden is going to try to reach out and deal with people in a fairer way, in a, I guess, a more sensible type of way. But President Trump is the type of person, as we've seen in America many times, even when he's been dealing with Nancy Pelosi and other members of Congress, when they say something to him that he doesn't like, or when they say something to him that he doesn't agree with, sometimes he'll just get up and he'll just walk out of the room. And so now with Joe Biden, I think you're going to see someone who's not going to at least do that. And that's not to say that he's going to always be the kind of leader that people want him to be, but nevertheless, he's not going to have the type of position that's going to be such that if you don't say what he wants to hear, he'll just walk away and refuse to talk to you. So now I think that there definitely is going to be an effort on his part to reach out to other leaders whenever he sees any type of human rights abuses, to try to not so much necessarily to interfere in other countries, but to try to do something to address those issues, but in a calmer and using a more sensible type of approach. And I think that's the way it's going to be beginning January 20th. So it's going to be totally different from the way it's been over the last 4 years.
Right. There's all sense, I don't know if you would agree with that given what's happening at home, and of course coronavirus is one, and then of course there's the issues of economy and various other, and of course also a very divisive polity as the vote informs us. So the sense is that President-elect Biden, at least for the first 1 year, will have the domestic agendas as top priorities. And while he brings, after Bush Sr. is probably the most experienced foreign policy hand to have come to the Oval Office, he'll probably have to sort of not exactly push it to the back burner, but that's not going to be the priority for at least the first year or so. And he's going to leave of that to the Sherpas.
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily even say that, because I've been listening recently to President Obama's recently published book, The Promised Land, and he was mentioning the fact that people look at the president as this one person who pretty much does everything, but the president has a very extensive cabinet and a very extensive staff. And so I think that Joe Biden, of course, is going to emphasize domestic issues like the coronavirus and the economy and healthcare and education, because those are the issues that the American public are mostly concerned with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to put other things on the back burner, because he has a very extensive staff that is going to be addressing those foreign issues at the same time that they're addressing the domestic issues. So I think that he is intending to hit the ground running, and we've already seen evidence of that in him putting together his transition team and now he's naming members of his cabinet and other high-ranking members of his staff. And so that means that he's going to address both issues, domestic and foreign, pretty much at the same time.
Right. So, Mark, that was Dr. Sharon Austin speaking with us. Let me go back to Ms. Brolsma. Ms. Brolsma, you deal with business analysis. Now, as I mentioned in my opening, there are a number of individuals, businesses, companies that the Trump administration has sanctioned. Is there a sense that business activity will pick up, this whole sort of protectionism and tariff war begun by President Trump will be kind of reversed, or at least this entire activity will become more rationalized under President-elect Biden?
Well, I think what the meetings on Monday showed is that there's still some optimism left in the U.S.-China relationship. I think, after 4 years of President Trump, I think there was kind of a question of is there any cooperation left? And I think this meeting showed, the meeting was over an hour long. It's usually in person. It was, on via online this year because of the coronavirus. But I think it showed that there is opportunity for collaboration and cooperation. Where exactly that will be, we have yet to see. I think issues around AI and around security and national security, so things like Hikvision, those kind of, or Huawei, those controversial companies may be more challenging to find common ground. But I think there are plenty of areas where U.S. and Chinese companies really do want to have a positive relationship and engage in exchange with one another.
One of the that Wang Yi seemed to be stressing during this conversation on the video link was the fact that there are sort of social and governmental variables, systems vary, and he was focusing on the fact that both sides should mutually respect each other's choices. That is something which China has been saying for a long time. But the United States policy, as you know, has a Wilsonian streak in it. It's an old streak. And it seems that given Joe Biden's previous record, that's not something that he is likely to ignore. But my sense is that perhaps he's not going to push it to a point where it begins to negatively impact other aspects of the relationship. Right? Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, I would say that especially during his first 100 days, where there are key domestic issues like the coronavirus, like having students return to schools, I think while those are on the front burner, I think issues that are more global in focus, while definitely being addressed, will certainly not be the New York Times front page headline. I think that we need to wait and see who Biden calls for his top China strategy team. I think that will say a lot about kind of what his direction is. I think it's not to be underemphasized that he has 40 plus years of experience in diplomacy, and I think that is something that will certainly be at play in negotiations. I think instead of having an outsider like Trump, who had never been in elected office prior to the presidency, to go from that to someone who is used to the timetables that come with long-term negotiations, I think there will be serious discussions around phase one of the trade deal in terms of it's a 2-year. Will China keep up its side of the bargain on purchases of U.S. soybeans, for example? So there's questions that I think will need to be addressed, but I think that they will be done in a much more patient manner than would have been done under a second term of
patient
Trump.
And perhaps more precise manner. Thank you so much. That was Kerstin Brolsma speaking with us. I'm now joined by Calvin Dark, who's principal and co-founder, RC Communications. Ms. Dark, thank you for being on the program. You're discussing, of course, relations between China and the U.S. have been deteriorating over the 4 years tenure of President Trump, but 2020 has been particularly bad. Now, with President-elect Biden and what China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said at the U.S.-China Business Council video link meeting, it seems Beijing is signaling and saying, well, we expect that now we can have a more civilized discourse and we can do business with Washington. What is your sense of what Wang Yi said?
Well, I think in some aspects it's true. I think that while we don't know the exact policies that President Biden will put in place with our relationship with China, we do know that it will be more rational. We know that it will be more strategic. We know that it won't have tinges of racism and that it won't be erratic. That we can count on. But what I think is also different is that it's not as easy as undoing everything that President Trump has done over the last 4 years, because here's the reality. You had over 70 million people that voted for Donald Trump, and a lot of Americans who, while they may not have agreed with the exact methods that he used with tariffs and the threats and the kind of irrationality, they do like him being tough, or at least appearing to be tough on China. So even if what Biden does is different, he just can't turn it all the way back to the pre-Trump days, because you have a lot of Americans who believe that we should be tough with China, even if it's tougher in a different way.
Absolutely. I'm happy you made that point, because I was making this point earlier with my guest. Now, in the event that, especially, let's look at it from the trade tariff war aspect. That is something which has been supported by lots of Americans. Now, how would President-elect Joe Biden go about that? Because it relates to outsourcing and, businesses going outside and people losing jobs in the United States. So, of course, that is something which obviously he will have to take note of. So, specifically with reference to that, what do you think President-elect Biden's policy is likely to be, and how might it be different from President Trump's?
Well, I think Joe Biden has already sent signals, almost said directly, that he won't be undoing the tariffs, immediately on day one or even in the beginning of his administration. When it comes to the tariffs, here's the very difficult situation that Biden's going to find himself in. Let's say with a team that he creates and that they come up with a strategy and a plan of how to use the tariffs or decrease them or change them to have a better U.S.-China policy. Well, regardless of that, President Trump has already made a lot of Americans, particularly Republicans that support him, believe that tariffs are something that they're not, that he has blatantly misrepresented what tariffs are. There are farmers in the middle of this country who believe that because of Donald Trump, China is paying them millions and billions all the time. So President Trump misrepresented that. What Biden has to do is not only come up with a good policy that works and that is better, but also to kind of help people understand what tariffs are, what the consequences really are. If not, they are going to look at everything that Biden does and say, well, no, Trump did it better because when he was in office, China just paid us billions because we were so tough. That's going to be a communications and PR battle that Biden's going to have on top of the policy battle.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And as a communications expert, you know that kind of strategic communication in such a divided polity is going to be a tough job for President-elect Joe Biden. But thank you so much. That was Calvin Dark speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss a report that the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest, is 0.86 meters higher than had been previously officially calculated. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about a report that the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest, is 0.86 meters higher than had been previously officially calculated. Until now, the countries differed over whether to add the snow cap on top. The new height is 8,848.86 meters. China's previous official measurement of 8,844.43 meters had put the mountain nearly 4 meters lower than Nepal's. Everest stands on the border between China and Nepal, and mountaineers climb it from both sides. Officials at Nepal's Foreign Ministry and Department of Survey said surveyors from both countries had coordinated to agree on the new height. Let's get to our experts to find out how this process works and what are the benchmarks used to calculate these heights. We are joined by Vanessa O'Brien, who has summited Mount Everest and also plunged the depths of Eastern Pool of Challenger deep. And we shall shortly also be joined by Santa Bir Lama, who is the tourism entrepreneur and president of Nepal Mountaineer Association. Vanessa O'Brien, you've been right up there. So it seems that, you calculated through various methods, but ultimately someone has to go on the top in order to finish that process. So how does this work? What are the benchmarks?
So I think what's unique about what they've done is this is the first serious survey that's been undertaken in 16 years. So it's important. It was nice that both nations came together to do it together, so there would not be any controversy about one nation's measurements over another's. They chose to do it as a joint research project and came to a joint conclusion using the snow peak rather than, say, the rock peak, because previously that can make a big difference. And I think if you had asked people, was it going to be higher or lower, there was some uncertainty because there was a very large earthquake, 7.8 magnitude, in 2015. And there was some uncertainty whether the effects of that earthquake were going to have the height adjusted downwards instead of upwards. So naturally, people think upwards because of the plate tectonics, where the plates are subducting under another plate to raise the mountains naturally about 4 millimeters a year. So we do think of Everest as growing 4 millimeters every year. But because of the earthquake that happened in 2015, quite a large one, people were thinking maybe it would be actually lowered. So to hear that it's gone higher, I think brings kind of a nice twist to the story. It's as you said, 0.86, but people will round that up. So it's effectively, people are hearing that it's grown 2 feet.
Okay.
That's the headline.
So tell us, what is the difference between the snow cap and the rock that you talked about? And secondly, I was looking at this, the geologist that said because of the quake that the height could have come down. But there are others who said that because of the quake and, the tectonic plates, the height could actually go up. So there was like, this difference of opinion. So snow cap, rock, and then this controversy.
Yeah, so the difference between what China had measured and what Nepal was measuring had been the snowpack. So what other mountains had traditionally been measured on was using the snow. So it's what mountaineers actually stand on. It's what you're standing on when you climb to the top of a mountain. And that's sort of a traditional measurement. And that accounted for a lot of the difference between the two calculations in the beginning. So Nepal was always a little taller, 29,028, and China was 29,017, something like that. That itself could have accounted for the difference. Simply, China was using the rock going down, not taking into consideration the snow. And traditionally, when you go across other mountains, they're actually measuring from where you stand. So if they're taking satellite measurements, GPS, they're taking it from the top of what those measurements can, trigonometry, theodolites, all of these other survey equipments are taking it from the top of where the snow is and from where people stand. So you can imagine the very, very top being a rocky mountain, there's going to be snow on top of that mountain. And that can be a couple of feet. Yep, a couple of feet thick.
Right. In fact, one report says, and I'm reading from the report, 4 Nepalese land surveyors spent 2 years training for the mission before heading to the summit. And Damodar Dhakal, who's spokesman at Nepal's Department of Survey, he told the BBC, before this, we had never done the measurement ourselves. So it's interesting. And so it seems to me that the previous measurements were done by the British surveyor team. I think it was somewhere in the late or mid 50s. So is it important to sort of do these measurements every 15, 20, 25 years?
One was 16 years later. So I think it's probably nice to recalibrate and make sure that you know what Mother Nature is doing, that there are going to be the regular effects that we expect with the 4 millimeter growth every year with the plate tectonics. But, we do expect earthquakes and other opposite effects to take place that could bring it down. So I think it is nice to calibrate. You don't have to do it so often, but here we have 16 years and we see it, people are going to round the 0.86 up and call it 8849. Of course, in 1999, the US or the Americans also did a survey and found it to be 8850, which is also kind of funny if you end up Googling different things. I always laugh that there's the American number and there's the rest of the world, which is not too different from other things. But it's nice to get an official figure, and I think something where everybody can rely on and hang their hat on.
Right.
So I think it's a good thing.
Right. Stay with me, Vanessa O'Brien. I'm also joined by Santa Bir Lama, who, as I said, would be joining us, the President, Nepal Mountaineer Association. Ms. Lama, this is the first time Nepal has done the measurement itself, and it's a great achievement. And also the fact that, now China and Nepal actually agree on the height of Mount Everest. So tell our viewers how that process went and what were the difficulties in coordinating with the Chinese, if at all.
Regarding for the Mount Everest measurement by Nepal government, it's last year, 2019, and just announced yesterday. This is the historical measurement by Nepal government and Nepal side. This is special, grateful for memorial and achievement for the Nepal government. And we hope all over countries, mountaineers, and other things between China and Nepal. So we have there's a nearest country. Mount Everest is, of course, is the Nepal, Himalayan, and Everest. Same time, both sides we have a permitted to climb Mount Everest. That's why Survey Department of Nepal and China is especially between Nepal and China's bilaterals and government to government. So agreed to announce in yesterday. The historically measured is Mount Everest, which comes more higher than before. But of course, we have to follow the Nepal government rules and historical of milestone for this history of Mount Everest measurement.
Right.
And of course, since a long time, since 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay Sherpa is climbing, and historically, and from British government is measured, and also U.S. government, and well as Indian government also measure in the Mount Everest. This regards is 2020. This very special event in Nepal is.
So this is the first time that Nepal has done this itself. Thank you so much. That was Santa Bir Lama speaking with us. Let me go back to Vanessa O'Brien. Vanessa, purely from the mountaineering angle, is it just about the height of the mountain that matters in terms of degree of difficulty, or there are other factors that count in terms of the degree of difficulty of summiting a mountain?
It's not just the height, it's the routes that you take on the mountain. So whether you climb through Nepal or whether you climb through the North Face in China, they both offer very different routes. The first route to be climbed by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay was the Nepal route, the South Face, and that's going through the Khumbu Icefall, which is very difficult and dangerous. Preceding the earthquake, there was a large icefall accident that killed many of the Sherpa going through that icefall. And that happens right out of Everest Base Camp, so it happens early in the climb. There are special, they're called icefall doctors that fix that part of the route on Everest. So it's very difficult to climb in Nepal, Everest, because you have to cross the Khumbu Icefall. On the North Face and on the Chinese side, it's a longer climb where you're in the death zone above 8,000 meters longer. So if I had to summarize them, maybe it's steeper in the Nepal side, but it's longer in the death zone on the Chinese side.
Right.
So Everest, by any means.
Yeah, so you have also climbed on the Pakistani side. I believe you've summited K2 also, a couple of other. How would you compare, for instance, K2 with the Everest climb?
So they're very different. K2 is statistically a harder mountain. For every 4 that climb, 1 dies. So it's a harder mountain compared to Everest. That's like comparing apples and oranges versus, say, different routes on Everest itself. A lot of that has to do with the shape of the mountain, the weather conditions. There's just so, getting there. When you climb Everest, you're going on a known path to the top where there are tea houses and a lot of infrastructure. When you're traveling to K2, you're building tents and you're going down a glacier and there's not as much infrastructure. It's just a lot harder to climb, and it has a lot more difficulty. Shaped like a triangle, it starts immediately extremely difficult. I'm really watching the winter K2 that's taking place now to see if it will actually happen. There's quite a few teams on K2 right now as we speak. We'll see if that actually takes place. One thing your viewers may find interesting is there's a difference between tall versus high when measurements take place. So if you look at, say, the definition of Everest being high versus tall, they're measuring from the base to the height. So if you look at Everest's 3,700 meter rise versus, say, somewhere like Denali, which has a 5,500 meter base to the summit, Denali is actually taller than Everest from the base to the summit.
Right.
Makes sense?
Those are very interesting technicalities. One final question with reference to Challenger Deep. How was that experience different from summiting a mountain?
So they're both important because, in Glasgow, COP26 is happening in November, so climate change is a big issue for this year. Both, whether you're talking about the atmosphere, whether you're talking about the oceans, if you look at our glaciers, a third of our glaciers in the Karakoram and the Himalayas are gone. A third are gone. If you wake up today and you decide that you care, it doesn't matter. A third of those glaciers are gone. You can only care about that second third. The oceans are also hugely important because the ocean acidification, the warming of the ocean is happening incredibly fast. Comparing these two experiences are more similar than they're not because they're both cold, they're happening in the dark, they're both risky. There's 8 tons of pressure by going almost 36,000 feet below or 10,925 meters below the ocean. And, I'm wrapped in electricity and titanium, which is not a good mix underwater. So it's terribly exciting to see something like that. It's dangerous, but I would go to get the water samples. I would go to do the surveying at the bottom of the ocean, much like the surveys that just happened here at the top, and to bring back the water samples to see that the ocean is indeed becoming more acidic. And so that's, I think, an important thing for explorers to be able to do is to give back and with the boots on the ground, whether they're on the ground or in the water, to continue to take samples and show what's happening to our planet.
Wow. Thank you. That was Vanessa O'Brien speaking with us. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.